The rain came down in sheets that night, the kind of cold October rain that doesn't fall so much as it hunts. It hunted Haley Whitmore across the wet pavement of Brookline, Massachusetts, slipping under the collar of her thin denim jacket, soaking through the cotton of her socks, finding every gap in every layer of cheap clothing she owned. She was 18 years old. She had been 18 years old for exactly 47 minutes. The heavy oak door of the house behind her was already shut. The brass knocker, the same brass knocker she had polished every Saturday morning for 12 years, as part of her stepfather's list of household chores, was now just a dull shape behind a curtain of falling water. The porch light had been switched off the moment the door closed. Even that small mercy had been denied her. 3 black trash bags sat at her feet. They were the heavy-duty kind, the contractor bags Garrett kept in the garage for yard cleanup. He had used them deliberately. He wanted her to look like garbage when she walked away. Inside the first bag were her clothes, a few pairs of jeans, 3 oversized sweaters that had once belonged to a thrift store stranger, a pair of running shoes with a hole in the left sole. Inside the second bag were her books, her notebooks for the senior year courses she would never finish, and a battered shoebox of photographs. Inside the third bag, wrapped in a plastic grocery sack to protect it, was the patchwork quilt her grandmother had stitched for her when she was 7. The quilt smelled like cedar and beeswax and a particular kind of lemon polish that Haley would later learn had a name. Right now, it just smelled like the only home she had ever truly known. She looked up at the second-story window. The master bedroom. The curtain twitched. For one long, idiotic moment, hope crawled back into her chest like a small, wounded animal. Her mother was there. Her mother was watching. Her mother would see her daughter shivering in the freezing rain, and she would push past Garrett, and she would come down those carpeted stairs in her silk robe, and she would say it had all been a mistake. A terrible misunderstanding, and there would be hot cocoa and apologies in a warm bed. The curtain fell back into place. Haley stood there a long time, long enough for the cold to stop being a sensation and start being a fact, the way gravity is a fact. She counted to 100. Then she counted to 100 again. The curtain did not move. Meredith had chosen. She had chosen the house with the 3-car garage and the Sub-Zero refrigerator. She had chosen the man who paid for her hair appointments and her tennis club membership and her quarterly trips to a spa in Vermont. She had chosen the comfortable lie over her own flesh and blood. And she had done it twice, really. Once 18 years ago when she had let Garrett walk into their lives, and once tonight when she had let him walk her daughter out. Haley bent down. Her fingers were already so numb that the plastic of the bags felt rubbery and strange. She gathered them up, one looped over each forearm, the third clutched against her chest like a baby. She turned her back on the house. She started walking. She had $34 in a checking account she had opened with her grandmother 3 summers ago. She had no car. She had no driver's license because Garrett had refused to take her to get one-siding insurance premiums. She was 2 months away from receiving her high school diploma. She had no friends she could call at this hour because Garrett had made it very clear over the years that no friend was ever to spend the night at the house, that no daughter of his stepfamily would be seen at parties, that decent young women did not run around at midnight in October. She had nothing. She walked along the highway shoulder. 18-wheelers rumbled past, throwing rooster tails of water that drenched her again every 2 minutes. Her sneakers were so wet, they made a sucking sound with every step. After what felt like an hour but was probably 20 minutes, she could no longer feel her toes. Then through the gray and the drizzle she saw it, a blur of red neon, a flickering sign shaped like a coffee cup. Bell's Diner. Open 24 hours. She pushed through the glass door. A small bell jingled above her head, cheerful and stupid. The warm air hit her face like a slap, and for one humiliating moment she thought she might actually fall to her knees on the linoleum. A waitress in her 50s with bottle blonde hair looked up from a coffee pot. The waitress's eyes traveled from Haley's soaked hair, down to her trembling hands, down to the 3 black trash bags. The waitress did not say anything. She did not ask questions. She just nodded toward the back corner booth, the one farthest from the door, and brought over a clean towel from behind the counter without being asked. Haley slid into the booth. The vinyl was cracked and patched with duct tape. She shoved the trash bags under the table out of sight. She wrapped the towel around her head and shoulders. The waitress set down a thick white mug and filled it with black coffee steam, curling up into the fluorescent light. "Pancakes are on the house tonight, sweetheart," the waitress said. Her name tag read, Belle. "You just sit as long as you need." Haley wanted to thank her. She wanted to say something dignified. Instead, she made a small sound in the back of her throat and bent forward until her forehead touched the rim of the coffee mug, and she cried. She cried for a long time. She cried until there was nothing left, and then she sat up and drank the coffee, and Belle refilled it without a word, and she drank that too. She watched the rain streak the window. She watched the truck drivers come and go. She watched a middle-aged couple share a piece of cherry pie in silence the way long married people do. She thought about her grandmother. Her grandmother, Cordelia Whitmore. Della to her friends, of which there had not been many in the last decade. The old woman had run an antique shop in a town called Millbrook, about 40 miles west of Boston, in the foothills of the Berkshires. She had been a tall, thin woman with iron-gray hair she wore in a single long braid, and she had smelled always of cedar and beeswax and that particular lemon polish. Della had died in April of a sudden stroke. 6 months ago, Haley had not been allowed to attend the funeral. Garrett had said the timing was bad for school. He had said it would be too upsetting. He had said a lot of things, and Meredith had nodded along, and Haley had spent the day of her grandmother's burial in trigonometry class biting the inside of her cheek until it bled. It was the loneliest day of her life. Until tonight. The bell above the door jingled. Haley did not look up. She had been not looking up for hours. A man's voice spoke directly above her booth. Haley Whitmore. She lifted her head. Standing at the edge of her table was a tall, thin man in his 60s, wearing a charcoal overcoat that had clearly cost more than her stepfather's car. He carried a brown leather briefcase. He was holding a gray felt hat in his free hand, the way men used to hold their hats indoors a long time ago. His face was deeply lined but kind, and his eyes behind a pair of wire-rimmed glasses were a startlingly clear blue. "Who's asking?" Haley said. Her voice came out flat and cracked. "My name is Nathaniel Brennan," the man said. He produced a business card and slid it across the Formica table. The card was heavy stock ivory-colored, embossed in black. "Brennan and Associates Attorneys at Law, Boston, Massachusetts. I'm an attorney. I have been trying to locate you for the better part of 3 weeks. Your stepfather has been, shall we say, unhelpful. I was hoping I might find you in the immediate area tonight. May I sit down?" Haley stared at him, then at the card, then at him again. She nodded slowly. He sat. He set his briefcase on the seat beside him, removed his glasses, polished them on a pristine handkerchief, replaced them on his nose. Every motion was precise and unhurried. Belle drifted over with a fresh mug. Brennan thanked her by name. Apparently he had been here before. "Mr. Brennan," Haley said carefully, "if Garrett sent you with paperwork to sign, I want you to know I have no intention of suing anyone for anything. I just want to be left alone. Please tell him that, and please leave." Nathaniel Brennan's face did a small, sad thing. He folded his hands on the table. "Miss Whitmore," he said, and the formality of it almost undid her again. "I do not represent your stepfather. I have never represented your stepfather. In fact, I will tell you plainly, I would not represent your stepfather if he came to me on his knees with a satchel of gold. I represent and have represented for the last 31 years the estate of Cordelia Adelaide Whitmore, your grandmother." The mug shook in Haley's hand. She set it down. "Your grandmother," Brennan continued in that same unhurried voice, "was the most clear-eyed woman I have ever known in my professional life. She saw things other people refused to see. She saw, in particular, the kind of man your stepfather is. She saw it from the very first dinner she was invited to attend after your mother became engaged. And she spent the rest of her life preparing for tonight." "Tonight," Haley whispered. "The night you turned 18. Brennan opened the brass clasps of his briefcase. They snapped open with a sound that seemed too loud in the quiet diner. He drew out a thick manila envelope. "Your grandmother set up a trust, Miss Whitmore. A very specific, very deliberate trust. Its assets transfer to you, and you alone automatically on the morning of your 18th birthday. That morning is today." He laid the envelope on the table between them. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his coat and produced something else, a heavy brass key on a leather fob. He set it gently on top of the envelope. "This," Brennan said, "is the key to the front door of Whitmore's Curiosities, the antique shop at 402 Maple Street in the town of Millbrook. The building, the land it sits on, and every single object inside it now belong to you. There is no mortgage. Your grandmother paid the deed off in 1989. Your mother does not know about the trust. By design. Your stepfather most certainly does not know about it. Also by design." Haley reached out a trembling finger and touched the brass key. It was real. It was warm from his pocket. It was heavy. "She left me the shop," Haley said. She was not asking. She was just saying it out loud to see if her mouth could form the words. "She left you a fortress," Brennan said quietly. "I will be honest with you. The shop has been closed since April. The building is old. The plumbing is older. Your grandmother let certain things slide toward the end of her life that perhaps she should not have. But it is a roof, Miss Whitmore. It is your roof. And it is paid for." He reached into his briefcase once more. This time he brought out a small white envelope, the size that holds a personal letter. On the front, in handwriting that Haley would have recognized in a coal mine, was her own name. Haley. Just Haley. Written in her grandmother's looping, elegant cursive. "She asked me to give you this," Brennan said, "personally on this day, and to make absolutely certain that you read it when you are alone. Not before, not in front of anyone. Alone. Will you promise me that Miss Whitmore—" "Yes," Haley said. She was crying again, but quietly this time. Different tears. Cleaner tears. "Good." Brennan slid the letter across the table. He stood. He buttoned his overcoat. He placed his hat back on his head. "The first bus to Millbrook leaves the depot 4 blocks east of here at 6:47 this morning. It is a 50-minute ride. I have taken the liberty of paying for your ticket." He produced a paper bus pass and laid it on the table. "I would offer to drive you myself, but your grandmother was quite specific that you were to walk through that front door under your own power, on your own 2 feet with no one else watching. She said you would understand why when you saw it." He paused. He looked down at her. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "your grandmother loved you very much. I want you to know that. Whatever else happens in the coming days, I want you to know that with absolute certainty. He touched the brim of his hat and walked out into the rain. Haley sat in the booth a long time after he left. The brass key felt heavy in her palm. The sealed envelope she did not open. Not yet. A promise was a promise. She slept for 40 minutes with her head on the manila envelope. Belle did not wake her until 5:45, and then only gently with another fresh mug of coffee and a paper plate holding 2 warm pancakes wrapped in foil. "For the road, honey," Belle said. Haley ate them on the bus. The rain finally slowed as the bus climbed into the Berkshire foothills, fading from a downpour to a dismal gray drizzle. Massachusetts in October. The maples had turned. Even through the dirty bus window, the hills burned red and gold and copper the way New England hills do when they are showing off. Millbrook was an old mill town that had stopped being a mill town a long time ago. Brick storefronts, sagging wooden awnings, sidewalks buckled by the roots of oaks planted before the Civil War. The bus dropped her at the corner of Maple and Hollis. Haley climbed down with her 3 trash bags, the heavy brass key warm in her coat pocket. 402 Maple Street stood between a failing bakery on the left and an empty storefront on the right. The painted gold leaf across the wide front window had faded to a ghost of itself, but she could still read it. Whitmore's Curiosities, Este, 1962. The brick was chipped near the foundation. The wooden awning over the door sagged at one corner. The window glass was so coated in dust she could not see through it. It looked exactly and perfectly like a forgotten thing. She set down the trash bags on the wet sidewalk. She took out the key. Her hands were shaking again, but it was a different kind of shaking now. The lock was old and stiff. She had to wiggle the key 3 times. On the 4th try, the deadbolt gave way with a heavy, satisfying click that seemed to echo down the empty street. She pushed the door open. The smell hit her first. Cedar, beeswax, that lemon polish, old paper and old leather, and the faint metallic tang of tarnished silver. The smell of every Saturday afternoon she had ever spent at her grandmother's side, learning the difference between a Hepplewhite chair and a Chippendale chair, learning how to wind a grandfather clock without breaking the mainspring, learning how to spot a real piece of Wedgwood from 100 clever fakes. She stepped inside, dragging her bags behind her. She closed the door. The bell above it gave a small, dusty chime. The shop was a labyrinth. 3 tall grandfather clocks stood like silent sentinels along the back wall. Their pendulums still their faces clouded. Glass display cases ran in rows down the center of the room, packed with tarnished silver pocket watches and porcelain dolls with unblinking eyes and stacks of leather-bound books, bleeding gold leaf from their spines. A Victorian fainting couch in faded green velvet sat at an angle near the front window. An Art Deco vanity, its mirror foxed and freckled with age, stood beside a rustic farmhouse table that was probably older than the United States itself. It was overwhelming. It was a museum and a junkyard and a magic shop all stuffed into one long, narrow brick building. It smelled like her grandmother. It felt like her grandmother. For the first time in 6 months, Haley did not feel alone. She locked the front door behind her. She dragged her trash bags behind the long oak counter that ran along the right-hand wall. She collapsed onto the green velvet fainting couch. She pulled her grandmother's quilt out of the 3rd bag and unwrapped it. She drew it over her shoulders. She closed her eyes. She slept the deep, dreamless, motionless sleep of the absolutely exhausted. When she woke, the light coming through the dust-caked windows was a flat afternoon gray. She had no idea what time it was. The shop was cold. There was no furnace running. The autumn chill had crept in through the old brick walls and settled into her bones. But she was alive, and she was inside, and she had a roof, and the roof was hers. She sat up. Her stomach growled loud and demanding. She had eaten 2 pancakes in the last 20 hours. First things first, she needed to find a working light, a working sink, anything she could use to assess the situation. She needed to take inventory of what she actually had to work with. She found a heavy black flashlight in the second drawer of the oak counter. Police issue, the long kind with the rubber grip. The batteries were old, but they still worked. The harsh yellow beam cut through the gloom. She found a notepad and a chewed pencil. She found a key ring with about a dozen small keys on it, none of them labeled. She found in the bottom drawer a stack of mail roughly 2 feet high. 6 months of mail. The postman had been pushing it through the brass slot in the front door for half a year, and it had piled up against the inside in a small avalanche before someone, probably Mr. Brennan, had stacked it neatly behind the counter. Haley began to sort. Most of it was junk. Catalogs, coupon flyers, a few subscription magazines about American folk art and clock restoration. She set those aside without opening them. Then she got to the envelopes with the official seals, the seal of the town of Millbrook, the seal of Berkshire County, the seal of the Massachusetts Department of Revenue. Her stomach, which had just been growling, went completely silent. She tore open the first envelope. Property tax delinquency. Second. Notice. The amount due was printed in red ink at the bottom right corner. She tore open the next one. Final notice of delinquent commercial property tax. She tore open the next one. Notice of intent to initiate tax title proceedings. She kept going. She lined the envelopes up across the counter, oldest to newest. The picture they painted was awful and absolutely clear. Her grandmother, in the last 3 years of her life, had stopped paying the commercial property taxes on Whitmore's curiosities. Haley did not know why. Maybe she had been ill longer than anyone realized. Maybe the money had simply run out. Maybe she had been so consumed with whatever she had been preparing for Haley that the ordinary bills had slipped through. It did not matter why. The final notice was stamped in heavy red ink across the top. It had been mailed 3 weeks ago. The total amount owed with penalties and interest was $18,420. If the debt was not paid in full by November 15th in 30 days, the building would be seized by Berkshire County and sold at public auction to satisfy the lien. Haley set the notice down very carefully on the counter as though it were made of glass. She had $34 in a checking account. She walked to the front window. She pressed her forehead against the cold, dusty glass. The rain had started up again, soft and steady. A handful of cars rolled past on Maple Street. The bakery next door had a single light burning in its back office. Her sanctuary was a trap. Her grandmother had handed her a key to a beautiful brick coffin with a 30-day fuse. She did not get the chance to finish that thought. A car door slammed outside. 3 quick steps on the wet sidewalk. Then a fist pounded the front door so hard, the bell above it jangled wildly, and one of the porcelain dolls in the nearest display case fell over. Haley, a voice she would have recognized blindfolded in a hurricane. Haley, I know you're in there. Open the door. Garrett Holloway. Her blood went so cold she actually had to grip the edge of the counter to stay standing. How? How had he found her this fast? She had been in Millbrook less than 12 hours. She had not told anyone where she was going. She had not even known where she was going. Then she understood. Of course, Garrett was a commercial real estate developer with his fingers in every county office between Boston and the New York border. He probably had an automated alert set on the deed of every old commercial building in western Massachusetts. The moment the title had transferred this morning, his phone would have pinged. She crept to the front window. Through a small, clean spot in the dust, she could see his car. A black Mercedes S-Class parked illegally on the curb, engine still running, wipers thumping. Garrett stood on the sidewalk under the sagging awning in a dove-gray Italian wool overcoat that probably cost more than the building's roof. His silver hair was combed back. His face was the face he wore in business meetings. Pleasant, patient, unreadable. It was the most dangerous face he had. He pounded again. "Haley, sweetheart, don't be childish. The county assessor is a personal friend of mine. I know about the tax lien. I know exactly what you walked into. Open the door. Let's talk like adults. Sweetheart." He had never once in 17 years called her sweetheart. Haley closed her eyes. She thought about her grandmother. She thought about Belle, the waitress who had not asked a single question. She thought about Nathaniel Brennan, who had said her grandmother loved her very much. She thought about Meredith behind the curtain. She opened her eyes. She walked to the door. She slid back the deadbolt. She pulled the door open. 6 inches, not more. "What do you want, Garrett?" He smiled. The smile did not reach his eyes. It never had. "What I want," he said softly, "is to save you from yourself. Your grandmother was a hoarder, Haley. A sick old woman with a sentimental attachment to a condemned building." He glanced past her into the gloom of the shop and wrinkled his nose. "This place is full of black mold. Probably asbestos in the walls. The roof has a sag I can see from the sidewalk. It is not a home. It is a liability. Are you going to let me in, or do we do this in the rain? Say what you came to say and leave." He sighed. The performance of patience. He reached into the breast pocket of his overcoat and drew out a thin leather checkbook and a black fountain pen. "You owe Berkshire County $18,420, he said. "You have, as of tonight, 29 days to produce that money. You have no job. You do not yet have a high school diploma. You have no credit history. No bank will lend you a dime. You are going to lose this building, Haley. That is not a threat. It is the simple mechanics of the situation." He uncapped the pen. "I am willing," he said, "out of family feeling, to make you a one-time offer. I will write you a personal check right now for $25,000. I will assume the tax debt directly with the county. You will sign over the deed to my development, LLC. You walk away with $25,000 in your pocket, which is more cash than you have ever seen in your life, and you go start fresh. Get an apartment, buy a used car, finish school. I am offering you a future, Haley. All you have to do is be smart enough to take it. $25,000 for one wobbly heartbeat. The math of it dazzled her. $25,000 was a year of rent. It was a beat-up Honda. It was a community college tuition. It was warm food and dry shoes, and a door she could lock against the world. Then she looked at his eyes. His eyes had not changed. His eyes were too bright, too eager. The eyes of a man who has worked very hard not to look like he is selling oceanfront property at gunpoint. $25,000 for a building Garrett had wanted for years, for a building her grandmother had refused to sell to him again and again for almost a decade, for a building on Maple Street in a town that was 3 years into a downtown revitalization plan with a brand new commuter rail station 6 blocks north. The land alone was probably worth 10 times what he was offering, maybe 20 times. He was trying to rob an orphan in a thunderstorm. "No," Haley said. The smile vanished. It did not fade. It vanished the way a magic trick vanishes. And what was left behind was the real face. The face Meredith had been married to for 16 years. What did you say to me? I said no, Garrett. She kept her voice flat. She held the edge of the door. I am not selling the shop. Not for 25,000, not for 50,000, not to you, not today, not ever. He took a step forward. He had a good 5 inches on her. He had used that 5 inches her entire life, looming in doorways, looming over the dinner table, looming over her bed. When he wanted to make a point about her grades, she had spent 17 years learning to make herself smaller in his presence. Tonight she did not get smaller. You stupid little girl, he said. He spoke very quietly, almost gently, which had always been the most frightening way he spoke. You think you can play businesswoman with me. You think you understand what is happening here. Let me explain it to you in small words. I'm going to walk back to my car. I am going to drive home. In 29 days, the county is going to seize this building. I am going to attend the public auction. I am going to buy this building for pennies on the dollar, because no other serious developer in Western Massachusetts will bid against me on it, because they all know better. And you will end up exactly where you were standing last night, on the sidewalk, in the rain, with 3 trash bags. Except this time you will not have a building to run to. This time there will be no Brennan in a fancy coat coming to fetch you. This time there will be nothing. Do you understand me, Haley? Get off my doorstep. I am trying to save you. Get off my doorstep or I am calling the Millbrook police. He laughed. It was a short, ugly sound. You don't even have a cell phone, sweetheart. Then I will use the landline behind the counter. He looked at her a long moment. He was reassessing. She could see him reassessing. He had expected the offer to work. He had expected her to weep with gratitude. The fact that she had said no twice with her back straight and her chin up was a piece of information he did not know what to do with. Enjoy the rats, Haley, he said finally. Enjoy the cold. Enjoy the next 29 days. I will see you at the auction. He turned. He walked back to the Mercedes. He drove away. Haley closed the door. She slid the deadbolt. She turned the dusty old turn lock above it for good measure. Then she walked very calmly behind the oak counter, and she sat down on the cold wooden floor, and she put her head between her knees and she shook. She shook for a long time. Then she stopped shaking because shaking was not going to save her. And Garrett was right about exactly one thing. She had 29 days. 29 days to find $18,420 in a shop full of dusty antiques that, for all she knew, were worth garage sale prices on a good day. She stood up. She walked the shop. She started opening drawers. She opened the drawers of a Victorian writing desk, old letters brittle and yellow, a broken pair of reading glasses, a tarnished letter opener shaped like a sword. She opened the cabinets under a tea service, mismatched cups, a roll of green felt, a box of mothballs. She opened the deep drawer at the bottom of a barrister's bookcase, old ledgers, sales receipts from 1978, nothing that screamed money, nothing that even whispered it. She knew in theory that some of the items in this shop must be valuable. Her grandmother had been a real dealer with a real reputation. But she did not have time to learn the trade. She did not have a buyer. She did not have an appraiser. She did not have a clue. The afternoon light faded toward evening. Her stomach was a fist of hunger. Her hands were filthy. Her fingernails had broken twice on stuck drawers. She was beginning to cry again, hot, frustrated tears she could not afford. She came to the back wall, the wall behind the silent grandfather clocks. There was a massive oak wardrobe pushed up flush against the brick. easily 7 feet tall, easily 400 pounds. Ornate, carved with vines and small grim faces. It looked like something out of a horror movie. She had no real reason to move it. She just needed to move something with her hands. She needed the simple, stupid act of pushing. She braced her shoulder against the side of the wardrobe. She planted her feet. She shoved. The wardrobe did not move. She shoved again, harder, her sneakers squeaking on the wood. It groaned. It shifted maybe an inch. She set her teeth. She put her whole body into it. She thought about Garrett's face on the sidewalk. She thought about Meredith behind the curtain. She thought about her grandmother in a hospital bed in April, with no one beside her because Garrett had decided the funeral would be too disruptive for Haley's studies. She shoved. The wardrobe scraped 6 inches across the floor, then a foot, then 2 feet. Old hidden dust mushroomed up around her ankles. She coughed. She kept pushing. The wardrobe lurched out into the room. Underneath, where the heavy oak base had stood for decades, the floorboards were different. She froze, panting. The rest of the shop's floor was made of long, continuous pine planks running the length of the room, standard for a building this old. But here in the rectangle the wardrobe had hidden there was a perfect square of shorter boards, maybe 3 feet by 3 feet. The boards were cut clean and fitted tight. She dropped to her knees. She wiped at the floor with the sleeve of her sweater. The dust came away in dark gray smears. There set, perfectly flush into the wood, was a small iron ring, rusted, old, heavy. She brushed away more dust. The iron ring was attached to an iron plate. The iron plate was set into a hinged square. It was a trapdoor that had been deliberately hidden by a massive wardrobe in the back corner of a shop owned by a woman who had spent her last decade preparing for the night her granddaughter turned 18. Haley sat back on her heels. Her heart was hammering against her ribs so hard she could feel it in her ears. She reached into the pocket of her jeans. The small white envelope was still there. The seal was still unbroken. Mr. Brennan's voice came back to her, calm and certain. "Read it when you are alone." She was alone. She slid her thumb under the flap. She broke the seal. She unfolded a single page of heavy cream-colored stationery. Her grandmother's handwriting filled it, looping and elegant and absolutely steady. "My dearest Haley, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and the wolves are already at your door. Garrett will come. He will come fast. He will offer you money. Do not take it. He will threaten you. Do not be afraid. He has wanted this building for many years. He has never understood why I refuse to sell. He believes it is sentimentality. He believes I am a foolish old woman with a fondness for dust. He is wrong about almost everything in his life, my brave girl. But he is most wrong about this. The shop is not the prize. The shop is the door. I spent my life collecting the past. The basement was always meant for your future. Go down the stairs. The combination to the steel door is your birthday, month, day, year. 6 digits. Be brave. Be careful. Trust no one in your mother's house. Trust no one in Garrett's circle. Trust Mr. Brennan, and only Mr. Brennan, in matters of the law. Happy 18th birthday, my darling girl. I am so very sorry. I could not be there to bake your cake. Give them hell. All my love always. Grandma Della. Haley lowered the letter. Her hand did not shake anymore. Her face was wet, but she was not crying. Something colder and steadier than tears had moved into her chest. She set the letter aside. She gripped the iron ring with both hands. She braced her feet against the floorboards. She pulled. The hinges groaned. The trapdoor lifted. Beneath it, falling away into the dark, was a narrow wooden staircase leading down. Cold, dry air rose up out of the opening. It did not smell like a cellar. It did not smell like dirt and damp and rot, the way the basement of an old brick building in New England should smell. It smelled very faintly of cedar and beeswax and that particular lemon polish, and underneath that of something cool and metallic and clean. Haley Whitmore picked up the heavy police flashlight from the counter. She clicked it on. The yellow beam dropped down the stairs and disappeared into the dark below. She took the first step down. The staircase was steeper than it had looked from above. 22 narrow wooden steps, each one worn smooth in the center by something that had walked these stairs a great many times. Haley took them slowly, one hand on the cold brick wall to her left, the other gripping the heavy flashlight. The yellow beam bounced ahead of her. Behind her, the rectangle of dim shop light grew smaller and smaller until it was just a pale square of gray hovering somewhere above her head. The air kept getting colder as she descended. Not the damp basement cold of a 150-year-old brick foundation. A different cold. A clean cold. A regulated cold. She reached the bottom step. Her flashlight beam hit a solid wall of brushed steel. She stopped breathing. It was not a cellar door. It was not a wooden door with iron hinges. It was not anything that belonged in the basement of an antique shop in a Berkshire's mill town. It was a vault door. The kind of vault door she had seen in the security wing of the Federal Reserve Building on a senior class field trip to Boston 3 years ago. A great rectangle of polished steel easily 10 inches thick set into a steel frame that had been bolted directly into the original brick. The seam where the door met the frame was so tight she could not have slid a piece of paper through it. To the right of the door at chest height was a small black panel, a digital keypad, 12 buttons. A small green LED in the upper corner blinked once a second, steady and patient, like the heartbeat of something that had been waiting down here in the dark a long time. Haley lowered the flashlight. The yellow beam pooled at her feet on the concrete floor. Concrete. The floor was poured concrete, dry and level. The walls on either side of her were the original brick of the building's foundation. But the chamber that held the vault door, the small antechamber at the bottom of the stairs, had been rebuilt. Recently. Within the last decade by the look of it. Her grandmother had quietly hired someone to renovate the bones of the building, and not one person in Haley's family had ever known. She pulled her grandmother's letter out of her pocket. She read the line again by flashlight. The combination to the steel door is your birthday. Month, day, year. 6 digits. She raised her hand to the keypad. Her fingers were trembling so badly, the flashlight beam jumped on the wall. She took a breath. She held it. She let it out. She entered the date. There was a single sharp beep, almost musical in the silence. Then a deep mechanical thunk from somewhere inside the door, a sound like a heavy bolt sliding home in reverse, and then a series of smaller clicks as the rest of the locking mechanism retracted. The green LED turned solid. Haley put her hand on the cold steel handle. It was the size of her forearm. She pulled. The vault door swung open on perfectly silent, perfectly oiled hinges. It moved as though it weighed nothing at all, balanced on bearings that had cost someone real money. She stepped through. She felt for a light switch on the inside wall. She found one. She flicked it up. The room flooded with light. 6 recessed LED panels in the ceiling came on at once, soft and clean and bright. The kind of warm white light you saw in jewelers' workshops and museum back rooms. The light pushed out the dark in every corner and left nowhere for shadows to hide. Haley lowered the flashlight slowly. Her mouth opened. The chamber was perhaps 30 feet long and 12 feet wide. The walls were poured concrete painted a clean dove gray. The floor was poured concrete sealed and polished. The ceiling was insulated. A small, unobtrusive vent in the back corner hummed faintly. Climate control. Whatever this room was, it was a climate-controlled room. She could feel the air on her face now, dry and steady. The kind of air the rare book swing of a university library would hold itself in. Along the left wall, running the full length of the chamber, stood 3 rows of heavy steel shelving. Industrial shelving, the bolt-together kind. Each shelf held neatly arranged fireproof lockboxes. Black mat identical, lined up like soldiers. She counted 36 lockboxes on the bottom row. There were 3 rows. She did not need to do the math twice. Along the right wall stood a row of map cabinets. Wide, flat drawers, the kind that architects used to store rolled blueprints in back before everything went digital. Below the map cabinets was a small workbench with a green felt mat, a brass jeweler's loop on a stand, a set of cotton handling gloves, and a small calibrated scale. In the center of the room, exactly in the center, stood a desk. A massive desk. Polished mahogany English by the look of the carving on the legs, easily a century old. Its surface was empty except for 2 objects: a thick, leather-bound ledger book and a small ring of silver keys. Haley walked towards the desk slowly. Her sneakers, still damp from last night's rain, made small, soft sounds on the polished concrete. The lemon polish smell was stronger down here, cleaner. Her grandmother had been in this room, recently, within the last 6 months, maybe within the last week of her life. The thought of it pushed something hot and aching up into her throat, and she pushed it back down, because there was no time for it. Not yet. She sat down at the desk. The leather chair behind it was tall-backed and worn smooth on the armrests. She set the flashlight aside. She put both hands flat on the wood for a moment, just to feel it, just to make sure it was real. Then she opened the ledger. The first page bore a single line written in her grandmother's looping cursive, in dark blue fountain pen ink. W.C. Private Collection. Inventory and Provenance. She turned the page. The handwriting was meticulous. Date acquired. Source. Item description. Appraised value with the name of the appraiser and the year of the appraisal. Storage location. The columns marched down the page in perfectly even rows. Haley ran her finger along the first entry. Shelf 2, Box 4. Carson City, Morgan Silver, $1889. 32 coins. PCGS encapsulated grades. MS 63 through MS 65. Appraised by Heritage Auctions 2021 at $144,000 at the low end. Haley blinked at the page. She turned to the next entry. Shelf 3, Box 1. Original manuscript draft letter from Thomas Jefferson to James Madison. Dated November 4th, 1799. Authenticated by the Massachusetts Historical Society 2019. Estimated auction value $90,000 to $120,000. Haley read it twice. She read it a third time. The words refused to mean what they were supposed to mean. She turned the page. Shelf 4, Box 7. 18 ounces of placer gold. Klondike provenance sourced from a private estate sale in Skagway, Alaska, 1996. Assayed at 23 carat. Current spot value at acquisition $14,000. Current spot value as of last revision approximately $54,000. She turned the page. Shelf 5. Pocket watches. Patek Philippe 1897. Gold Hunter case original movement papers. Audemars Piguet 1912. Vacheron Constantin 1883. 3 watches. Combined appraised value $270,000. She turned the page. Postage stamps. Confederate provisional issues. A Benjamin Franklin from 1847. A British Guiana 1-cent magenta facsimile and the certified provenance for the real one her grandmother had once briefly consigned and brokered for a private collector in 2008. The commission from which had apparently funded the construction of this very vault. She turned the page. She stopped turning pages. She closed the ledger. She put her forehead down on the cool leather cover. She let out a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a sob. Her shoulders shook. Grandma Della had not been a hoarder. Grandma Della had not been a sentimental old woman with a cluttered shop. Grandma Della had been one of the quietest, sharpest, most disciplined collectors in New England. She had spent 50 years building a private collection that would not appear in any public record, would not show up on any tax form, would not be touched by any of the predatory men who circled the rest of her family. She had kept it in a vault beneath a deliberately shabby antique shop in a deliberately overlooked mill town. And she had timed the inheritance down to the hour for the morning her granddaughter turned 18. The whole shop upstairs. The dust. The sagging awning. The faded gold leaf lettering. The cluttered chaos of unsorted Victorian junk. It had all been camouflage. Haley sat up. She wiped her face with her sleeve. She picked up the ring of silver keys. She walked to the shelves. Each lockbox had a small brass tag. Shelf 1 box 1. Shelf 1 box 2. She matched the tag against the ledger. She walked along the row until she came to shelf 2 box 4. She fitted one of the small silver keys into the lock. It turned smoothly. She lifted the lid. Inside, on a bed of dark blue velvet, lay rows of clear, hard plastic slabs. Each slab was the size of a playing card. Each slab held a single coin. Each coin was a Morgan silver dollar heavy and gleaming almost as bright as the day it had been struck. On each slab was the holographic seal of the Professional Coin Grading Service, the PCGS hologram she vaguely remembered from a documentary about coin auctions her grandmother had once made her watch on a rainy Sunday. The grades were printed neatly on each slab: MS-63, MS-64, MS-65. Haley took out one slab. She held it under the light. The coin had a Carson City mint mark on the reverse, a tiny stylized CC sitting just beneath the eagle's tail feathers. Carson City, Nevada, 1889. 137 years ago, a man in a leather apron in a federal mint in the high desert had struck this coin out of silver, dug out of a Comstock vein, and her grandmother had bought it and graded it and put it in a velvet-lined box in a climate-controlled vault and waited. She put the slab back. She closed the lid of the box. She locked it. She slid it carefully back onto the shelf. She had her tax money. She had it 10 times over. She had a future. She was not done. She walked back to the desk. She sat down. She made herself breathe slow and deliberate the way her grandmother had taught her to breathe the first time Garrett had screamed at her in the kitchen when she was 9. The flashlight beam before she had turned on the LEDs had caught something. She had not registered it consciously at the time, but her eye had logged it. Something out of place. Something that did not match the rest of the room's perfect order. She knelt down beside the desk. Tucked beneath the desk, screwed directly into the underside of the mahogany frame with 2 small brass brackets, was a small flat lockbox. Not the matte black industrial kind on the shelves. A different kind. Older. Smaller. Made of pebbled black metal the size of a hardcover book. The kind of personal cash box a shopkeeper from the 1940s would have kept under the counter. It did not have a brass tag. It did not have a number. It had a single strip of yellowed masking tape stuck to the top. and on the masking tape in heavy black marker in her grandmother's handwriting was a single word: Garrett. Haley's hands went cold all over again. She unscrewed the brackets with her thumb and forefinger. They came away easily. Her grandmother had set them snug, but not tight. She had wanted this box to come out of its hiding place in a hurry when the moment came. The moment had come. Haley set the box on the desk. She tried the silver keys one by one until the fourth one turned in the lock with a small final click. She lifted the lid. There was no gold inside. There were no coins, no jewels, no rare stamps. There was paper. There was a great deal of paper. Folders, thick manila folders, each one neatly labeled in fountain pen on the tab. Bank records, wire transfer records, photocopies of canceled checks, notarized witness statements. A photograph of a man Haley had never seen, a thin, balding man in his 50s, standing in front of an office building in what looked like the Cayman Islands. A bound private investigator's report, easily 200 pages thick, with the seal of a firm called Hartwell Investigations, Boston, across the front. And on top of everything else, a single sealed envelope smaller than the others, the cream stationery she had already learned to recognize, with one word written across the front in her grandmother's looping cursive: read second. She did not read it second. Not yet. She set it aside. Her grandmother had been a meticulous woman. There was an order to this. There would be a reason for the order. Haley opened the investigator's report first. The opening page was a cover letter dated 2016, addressed to Cordelia A. Whitmore, signed by a man named Russell Hartwell, senior investigator. The letter was brief and businesslike. Mrs. Whitmore, per our retainer agreement of 2015. Please find enclosed the consolidated findings of our 3-year investigation into the financial activities of Garrett W. Holloway between the years 2003 and the present date. As discussed by phone, the documentary evidence supports your initial suspicions in their entirety and exceeds them. We recommend strongly against any direct confrontation. The subject is dangerous in ways your daughter does not appear to fully understand. We have provided multiple copies of all source documents per your request. The originals are held in secure storage. Please advise as to next steps at your convenience. Haley lowered the cover letter. She turned the page. For the next 2 hours, she sat at the desk in the perfect light of the vault and read. She read the way a person reads a death certificate. Slowly, carefully, twice for each line. The story the documents told was so cleanly horrible it almost felt staged. She would not have believed it if it had been written in a novel. But Russell Hartwell of Hartwell Investigations had not written a novel. He had written a forensic accounting timeline, and he had attached the receipts. In 2003, Bennett Whitmore, Haley's father, had been 27 years old. He had been the founder and majority owner of a small commercial contracting firm called Whitmore Construction, LLC, based in Quincy, Massachusetts. Whitmore Construction did mid-size commercial renovations, mostly for restaurants and small retail clients in the greater Boston area. It was not a glamorous business. It was a solid one. Bennett had grown it from 2 trucks to 9 in 5 years. In late 2003, Bennett Whitmore had brought on a silent partner, a man with money to invest a 30% equity stake in connections in real estate development. The man's name was Garrett Holloway. Garrett had been 32 years old. He had presented Bennett with a portfolio that turned out in retrospect to be largely fabricated, and a personal balance sheet that turned out to be inflated by a factor of roughly 4. He had been charming. He had been deferential. He had been, in the words of one Whitmore Construction employee, whose deposition Hartwell had taken in 2015, the most agreeable business partner anyone had ever met. For 3.5 years, Garrett had moved very slowly. He had asked good questions at quarterly meetings. He had attended one company barbecue. He had on 2 separate occasions recommended Bennett to small commercial clients of his own. The relationship had appeared from the outside and from the inside, both entirely professional and entirely healthy. In early 2007, things had begun to change. Hartwell had laid it out month by month. Garrett, who had been granted limited check-signing authority on a single operations account for the convenience of paying vendors when Bennett was at a job site, had quietly persuaded Bennett to expand that authority. There had been good reasons offered for every expansion. A new line of business, a streamlining of accounts payable, a piece of equipment financing that needed to close quickly while Bennett was meeting with a client in Worcester. By the middle of 2007, Garrett had check-signing authority on every account Whitmore Construction held. Then the bleeding had started. Hartwell had documented 47 separate wire transfers across an 18-month period, beginning in August of 2007 and continuing through the spring of 2009. Each one routed through the same chain of correspondent banks. Each one ended in a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. Each one was authorized with a signature that was supposed to be Bennett Whitmore's, but that Hartwell's documents examiner had concluded with what the report called a high degree of forensic certainty had been forged. The signatures were close. They were the work of someone who had access to genuine Whitmore signatures and had practiced, but they were not Bennett's hand. The total amount drained from Whitmore Construction across those 18 months was $3,140,000. In addition, Garrett had used his expanded authority to take out 2 large commercial lines of credit in Whitmore Construction's name secured against the company's assets. The lines of credit had been drawn down completely within 90 days. The cash had vanished into the same chain of Cayman shell companies. By March of 2009, Whitmore Construction had been insolvent. By April, it had been served with the first of 3 federal subpoenas because 2 of the bank officers who had processed the wire transfers had begun to develop concerns and had filed suspicious activity reports with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. By May, Bennett Whitmore had hired a criminal defense attorney to advise him on a federal wire fraud investigation he could not understand because he had not done any of the things he was being investigated for. On June 17, 2009 at 3:42 in the afternoon, Bennett Whitmore had collapsed on the kitchen floor of his small rented house in Quincy. He had been 32 years old. He had been holding a glass of water. The cause of death, according to the medical examiner's report, which Hartwell had appended to the file, had been a massive myocardial infarction. The autopsy noted significant stress-related cardiomyopathy. The medical examiner had recorded the death as natural causes. The medical examiner had not known about the federal investigation, the forged wire transfers, the Cayman shell companies, or the silent partner. Meredith Whitmore, 25 years old, had been widowed with a 1-year-old daughter and no income. The federal investigation, deprived of its principal, had eventually closed without indictments. The shell companies in the Caymans had quietly liquidated their balances and dissolved over the following 8 months, the money moving through a further 3 layers of structure before resurfacing. Hartwell wrote as seed capital for a Massachusetts real estate development, LLC, called Holloway Capital Partners. The LLC's first major acquisition in the autumn of 2009 had been a half-built strip mall in Natick. The strip mall had been the foundation of Garrett Holloway's commercial real estate career. In 2010, Garrett Holloway, recently flush with cash, had begun an attentive courtship of the grieving young widow of his former business partner. Haley closed the binder. She sat in the chair a long time. The vault was very quiet. The vent in the back corner hummed its faint, steady hum. The polished concrete was cool under her sneakers. Somewhere over her head in the shop, a floorboard settled with a small wooden sigh. Her father had been 32 when he died. He had been holding a glass of water. He had been a working contractor with calluses on his hands, and a 1-year-old baby girl, and a man he had trusted enough to give signing authority to had killed him. Not with a gun, with a forged signature. 47 times over 18 months, until his heart gave out under the weight of a federal investigation he could not understand. And then that man had married her mother. And then that man had spent the next 16 years inside her childhood, looming in doorways and over dinner tables, criticizing her grades and her clothes and her posture, paying for everything, and reminding her of it daily, building his empire on the bones of her father's company. And tonight that man had thrown her out into the rain. Haley's hands did not shake. Her face did not move. Something inside her was rearranging itself slowly and carefully into a new shape, a harder shape, a useful shape. She picked up the second envelope, the small one, the one her grandmother had written, "Read second" on. She broke the seal. She unfolded a single page, 2 paragraphs. Her grandmother's hand, dated 3 weeks before her grandmother's death. My darling Haley, you will be tempted when you finish reading the Hartwell report to focus all of your rage on Garrett. He deserves the rage. He deserves every ounce of it. But you must know one more thing before you decide what to do. You must know it because not knowing it would be a worse betrayal than anything Garrett has done. And I would rather break your heart with the truth than protect you with a lie. Your grandfather raised me on that principle. I am too old to abandon it now. Look in the folder marked 1973. There is a letter at the back. It is written in your mother's hand. It is dated August of 2015. Read it. Then come back upstairs and decide what kind of woman you are going to be. I love you with every breath I ever drew. Della. Haley set the letter down. She looked at the lockbox. There was indeed a folder at the back of the box, labeled in her grandmother's hand with the year 1973. The year was wrong on purpose. The year was a misdirection, in case anyone else ever found the box. Her grandmother had been thinking 3 moves ahead even here. Haley opened the folder. The papers inside were not from 1973. They were from 2015. 5 sheets of pale lavender stationery. Stationery the kind Meredith had used for her thank you notes for as long as Haley could remember. The handwriting was Meredith's. Haley had received Christmas cards in this hand every year of her life. She read the letter. Meredith had written it to her own mother in August of 2015. Haley would have been 7 years old. The letter was 4 pages long. The first page apologized at length for the silence between mother and daughter. The second page made a tentative reference to certain financial concerns Meredith had begun to have about her husband over the previous summer. The third page was the page Haley could not stop reading. In the third page, Meredith confessed that she had, in July of 2015, accidentally come across a folder in Garrett's home office that she had not been supposed to see. The folder had contained printouts of offshore bank statements in the names of shell companies she did not recognize. She had recognized some of the dates. The dates had lined up with periods of financial distress at her late husband's company, the company she had inherited a fragment of in 2009, and which had been wound down at a complete loss. She had also recognized her late husband's signature on certain pages, but she had thought even at the time that the signatures had not looked entirely right. She had put the folder back exactly as she had found it. She had not asked Garrett about it. She had not contacted an attorney. She had not contacted her mother until that night. She wrote in the letter that she had thought about it for 3 weeks before deciding to write. She wrote that she did not know what to do. The fourth page was the page that finished the job. On the fourth page, in her own handwriting on her own stationery, Meredith wrote a single sentence that Haley would carry with her for the rest of her life. She wrote that she had decided after careful reflection that whatever Garrett had or had not done in the past, the comforts of her current life with him were too valuable to risk by pursuing what was almost certainly already buried in time. She asked her mother to keep this conversation private. She closed the letter with love and signed it with her full name. Cordelia Whitmore's response was not in the folder. Cordelia Whitmore's response had been to never speak to her daughter again for the remaining 11 years of her life. Cordelia Whitmore's response had been to hire Hartwell Investigations the very next month, and to begin building the case her granddaughter was now holding in her hands. Haley refolded the letter. She slid it back into the folder. She slid the folder back into the lockbox. She closed the lid. She locked it. She sat at the desk. Her mother had known. Her mother had known for 11 years. Her mother had known when she stood at the curtain of the master bedroom window and watched her 18-year-old daughter be thrown into the rain. Her mother had known when she had refused to let Haley attend Della's funeral in April. Her mother had known every single time she had told Haley to apologize to Garrett for some imagined slight at the dinner table. The grief was a strange, slow thing. It came in from the edges. It did not knock her over. It did not make her cry. It just settled in the corners of her chest and made a home there the way a long-term tenant settles into a small apartment. The rage was a different animal. The rage was much more practical. She stood up. She walked back to shelf 2, box 4. She unlocked it. She removed 4 of the encapsulated Morgan dollars, choosing carefully from the highest grades. She slid them into the inside pocket of her denim jacket against her chest, where she could feel the small weight of them. She walked back to the desk. She picked up the manila folder marked Garrett. The whole folder, the Hartwell report, the supporting documents, the lavender letter. She put them inside the larger satchel she found in the bottom drawer of the mahogany desk. A beautiful old leather messenger bag. Her grandmother had clearly placed there for this exact purpose. She turned off the lights. She stepped out of the vault. She pulled the steel door closed behind her. It thunked into its frame. The green LED on the keypad went dark, then resumed its slow, steady blink. She climbed the wooden stairs. In the shop above, the gray light through the windows had softened toward true evening. The rain had stopped. The street outside was quiet. Haley lowered the trap door. She pushed the heavy oak wardrobe back over it an inch at a time until the seam disappeared completely beneath its base. She did not sleep. She sat on the green velvet fainting couch with her grandmother's quilt wrapped around her shoulders, the leather satchel on her lap. And she planned. She planned all night. She thought about what a man like Garrett would do given 29 days. She thought about how a man like Garrett would react if he learned, even by rumor, that the granddaughter he had thrown into the rain had begun to sell objects of real value through reputable channels. She thought about which of her grandmother's instructions she was going to follow, and in what order, and what she was going to do if any of them failed. At 5 in the morning, she stood up. She washed her face in the small, dusty bathroom at the back of the shop, using cold water from a pipe that still miraculously worked. She put on her cleanest sweater. She braided her wet hair. She took the leather satchel. She walked 4 blocks to the all-night gas station on Hollis Street. She used 20 of her $34 to buy a prepaid burner phone with 200 minutes on it. She used the phone sitting on a bench outside the gas station as the sky began to turn gray to research rare coin dealers in the greater Boston area. She wanted a firm that had been in business for at least 30 years. She wanted a firm with a verified street address, not a post office box. She wanted a firm that handled PCGS-graded material as a matter of routine and had a published reputation among serious numismatists. She found 3. She compared them. She chose one. Ashford, Numismatics and Rare Metals, Newbury Street, Boston. Established 1968. Proprietor Walter J. Ashford. She caught the 623 commuter rail out of Millbrook. She rode east into the rising sun. Boston came up out of the morning in a haze of copper light, and she walked the 7 blocks from South Station to Newbury Street, with the satchel held tight against her side. Ashford Numismatics occupied the ground floor of a narrow brownstone between a tailor and a wine bar. The front window was discreet. A small brass plaque beside the door. A buzzer. She pressed the buzzer. A camera mounted above the door tilted down to look at her. After a moment, the lock buzzed open. The interior was quiet. Carpeted. Lined with locked oak and glass display cases. The air smelled like cigar smoke that had been put out a long time ago. A man stood behind the rear counter. He was perhaps 68 years old. He wore a tweed waistcoat and a watch chain. He had a jeweler's loop on a black cord around his neck, and a pair of half-moon reading glasses pushed up into his thinning white hair. He looked at her over the half-moons. "Can I help you, miss?" His tone was polite. The polite tone of a man who had seen a great many people walk into his shop with great hopes for the wristwatch their grandfather had left them, and who had been gently disappointing those people for 40 years. "Mr. Ashford?" "I am. My name is Haley Whitmore. My grandmother was Cordelia Whitmore of Whitmore's Curiosities in Millbrook. She passed in April. I need to liquidate a small portion of her estate today." Walter Ashford's face changed. It changed only a very small amount. A professional's face. But Haley saw it. The half-moon glasses came down out of his hair and settled on his nose. He looked at her more carefully. The way you look at a piece of furniture you have just realized is older than you thought. "Cordelia Whitmore was a friend of mine," he said quietly. "I went to her wake. I did not see you there. I was not allowed to attend." He looked at her another long moment. "What have you brought me, Miss Whitmore?" Haley opened the leather satchel. She drew out the 4 PCGS slabs. She laid them on the green felt mat on top of the counter, side by side in a neat row. Walter Ashford did not move for several seconds. Then he picked up the first slab. He turned it in his hand. He brought the loop up to his eye. He examined the holographic seal. He examined the coin under it. He picked up the second slab, the third, the fourth. He set them all down. He looked up at her. 1889 Carson City Morgans, all 4. 2 graded MS-64. 2 graded MS-65. PCGS current generation holograms, verifiable serial numbers. "Yes, sir." "Miss Whitmore, are these 4 coins the entirety of what you would like to sell today?" "Yes, sir." "And may I ask what you intend to do with the proceeds?" "I intend to walk to the Berkshire County Tax Assessor's office this afternoon, sir, and pay $18,420 in delinquent property taxes on my grandmother's building." Walter Ashford looked at her over the half-moon glasses for a long time. Then he turned around and walked through a small door behind the counter. She heard a safe open somewhere in the back of the shop. She heard the rustle of paper. She heard a checkbook close. He came back out. He set a leather-bound checkbook on the counter. He uncapped a heavy black pen. "My offer for these 4 coins is $28,000 cashier's check drawn on my account at State Street Bank. Payable to you today." The market is up. The grades are excellent. I do not intend to insult your grandmother's memory by negotiating with her granddaughter on the morning she walks in here for the first time. Is that acceptable to you, Miss Whitmore?" "Yes, sir." "Sit down, please. This will take 15 minutes. Haley sat down on the small leather chair in front of the counter. She set the satchel on her lap. She put one hand on top of it. She did not let go of it for the entire 15 minutes. It took Walter Ashford to authenticate the holograms against his database, fill out the bill of sale, draw the check, and slide it across the green felt to her. By 1 in the afternoon, she was standing in line at the Berkshire County Tax Assessor's office, back in Millbrook. The line was short. The clerk behind the bulletproof glass had a name tag that read, Gloria, and a tired face. Haley slid the cashier's check through the slot, along with the property notice and the address. Gloria looked at the check. Gloria looked at Haley. Gloria looked at the check again. Gloria typed for a long time. When she was done, she printed out a receipt on heavy white paper, stamped it with a date stamp, and slid it back through the slot. "Account is settled in full, miss. No lien, no outstanding penalties. You will receive a confirmation letter from the county in 7 to 10 business days." "Thank you," Haley said. She stepped out onto the sidewalk. The October sun was thin and clear. The Berkshires burned red and gold on every hillside. She had $9,580 left in her checking account. She had a deed to a building. She had a vault full of evidence and silver. She had her grandmother's leather satchel slung across her chest. She hailed a taxi. She gave the driver the address on Maple Street and leaned her head back against the seat and let her eyes close for the 40-minute ride home. She felt for the first time in 18 years, and one day that she might actually live to see 20. The taxi turned onto Maple Street. Haley opened her eyes. There were 3 vehicles parked in front of Whitmore's Curiosities. A black Mercedes S-Class engine off-parked right at the curb. A white pickup truck with the Berkshire County seal on the door and a generator running in the bed. And a Millbrook Police Department cruiser lights off idling behind the truck. A man in a yellow hard hat and a high-visibility vest was kneeling on the sidewalk in front of her shop's front window, screwing a large sheet of plywood into the brick with an electric drill. A bright red poster had been pasted across the glass of her front door. Even from this distance, she could read the heavy black lettering on it. Condemned. Garrett Holloway was standing on the sidewalk with his hands in the pockets of his overcoat, watching the man with the drill. A police officer stood a few feet away looking bored. Garrett looked up. He saw the taxi. He saw her. He smiled. Haley threw a $20 bill over the seat and was out of the taxi before it had fully stopped moving. Her sneakers hit the wet sidewalk hard. The leather satchel banged against her hip. She did not run. Running was what Garrett wanted. Running was what a frightened 18-year-old girl who had no idea what to do would do. She walked. She walked fast, and she walked straight, and she walked with her chin up. The man with the drill saw her coming first. He looked up. He looked at Garrett. The drill kept whining against the brick. A long curl of red dust spiraled down from the bit and settled on the toe of his work boot. "Stop drilling," Haley said. The man did not stop. He looked at Garrett again. Garrett gave him a small, indulgent nod, the kind a father gives a son who has paused in the middle of mowing the lawn. "I said stop drilling." She stepped between the man and the brick. She put her hand flat on the wall of her own building. The drill bit was 3 inches from her knuckles. The man cursed under his breath and lifted the bit away. "Miss," the police officer said, finally interested enough to take a step forward. He was a stocky man in his late 40s with a brushed steel mustache and a nameplate that read, Hargrove. "You need to step back. The building has been declared unsafe. No one is permitted within 10 feet of the front facade. I am asking you politely. Officer Hargrove? Yes. My name is Haley Whitmore. I am the deed-holding owner of this property. I took title yesterday morning. I have the receipt for paid-in-full property taxes in my pocket. I would like to know who declared my building unsafe, and on what basis and when, and I would like to know it before another screw goes into my brick. Officer Hargrove looked at her for a long moment. His face did not change much, but his eyes, gray and patient under the brim of his cap, did a small thing. He had been doing this job a long time. He had heard a great many sentences in his career, and he could tell almost instantly the difference between a sentence rehearsed in front of a mirror and a sentence spoken by a person who had thought about every word in it. He turned his head very slightly toward Garrett. "Mr. Holloway," he said, "would you like to introduce the young lady to the engineer?" Garrett's smile widened. He stepped forward smoothly, his hands still in the pockets of his overcoat, the gracious host at a small, unfortunate misunderstanding. "Haley, sweetheart, I am so glad you came back. I was afraid you had run off again. This is Howard Pike. Mr. Pike is the senior structural engineer for the Berkshire County Office of Public Safety. Howard, this is my stepdaughter, Haley. The young lady I told you about this morning. The runaway." Howard Pike was a thin man in his late 50s, with a sunburned neck and the bad posture of someone who had spent 40 years bending down to read foundations. He did not look at Haley. He looked at his drill. He looked at the sidewalk. He looked at anywhere on earth that was not her face. "Mr. Pike," Haley said. "Miss." His voice was a low gravel scrape. "Mr. Pike, when did you enter the interior of this building?" A small silence. Garrett answered for him smoothly. "Mr. Pike performed a rapid emergency exterior assessment this morning. Given the obvious public hazard from the sagging awning and the visible foundation cracking, he was within his statutory authority to issue an emergency condemnation order without an interior inspection. Is that not correct, Howard?" "That is correct," Howard Pike said. He still did not look at her. "Mr. Pike." Haley took one step closer to him. Her voice did not rise. It went flat instead, the way thin ice goes flat in the moment before it breaks. "I would like you to look at me, please." Pike looked at her. His eyes were the watery blue of an old man who had not slept enough the night before. "Mr. Pike, if you sign an emergency condemnation order today based on an inspection you did not actually perform, you are not signing a permit. You are signing the Predicate Act in a federal racketeering case. The Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act covers a pattern of fraudulent acts undertaken in concert with another party for personal financial gain. 2 predicate acts within a 10-year period are sufficient for an indictment. The penalties, as I am sure your county council could tell you, run to 20 years per count. My stepfather has spent a long time building a real estate portfolio in this state. Your name will appear in every filing that mentions this property from this morning forward. I have already retained an attorney out of Boston. I have evidence in my possession that pertains to an unrelated, much older case involving Mr. Holloway. The FBI field office in Boston is going to be reading my attorney's referral letter inside of 2 weeks. When they pull the thread on Mr. Holloway, they are going to pull the thread on every county official who took a check from him in the last decade. I am asking you a direct question. Did you receive payment from Garrett Holloway this morning in exchange for a condemnation order on this property? The drill clattered out of Howard Pike's hand. It hit the sidewalk and bounced twice and lay there whining at a lower pitch. Officer Hargrove looked at Garrett, then at Pike, then at Haley, then back at Pike. The boredom had drained out of his face. He had moved his weight back onto his heels the way a cop moves his weight, when he has decided that the next 3 minutes are going to matter. "Howard," Hargrove said. His voice was very quiet now. "Howard, look at me." Pike looked at him. "Howard, did this young lady just ask you a question? About money?" Howard Pike stood there in the cold afternoon sun with the drill whining at his feet. He was 61 years old. He had a pension. He had a grandson in the 2nd grade. He had a mortgage with 8 years left on it on a small ranch house in Pittsfield. He had a wife who knew nothing about the envelope of cash sitting in his glove compartment. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. "Shut up, Howard," Garrett said. It was the wrong thing to say. It was the worst thing he could have said. Officer Hargrove's chin came up about half an inch. His right hand, which had been resting easy on his duty belt, moved a fraction of an inch closer to the radio at his shoulder. "Mr. Holloway," Hargrove said, "I would appreciate it if you allowed Mr. Pike to answer the lady's question. Officer, with respect, this entire conversation is a smokescreen. This girl is a runaway minor with a documented history of—" "Mr. Holloway, I'm going to ask you one more time to step back from Mr. Pike and to allow him to speak." Garrett looked at the officer. He looked at Haley. The mask was beginning to slip, but only at the corners. He could feel it slipping. He pulled it back into place with the visible effort of a man who had been wearing a particular face for a long time. "I never went inside," Howard Pike said. It came out all at once, as if he had been holding it behind his teeth for hours and his jaw had finally given out. "I never went inside the building. I drove out from Pittsfield this morning at 6. Mr. Holloway met me on the corner of Maple and Hollis at 6:20. He handed me an envelope. He said the girl was a runaway and a known drug user, and that nobody would ever push back on the paperwork. He said the building was vacant, and the deed was disputed. He said the county supervisor was a friend of his. He said it was already cleared. I never went inside the building. I never inspected the building. I drew up the condemnation order in my truck. The envelope had $7,000 cash in it. It is in my glove compartment. You can look." Garrett moved. He moved fast for a man of 50 in an Italian overcoat. He moved at Howard Pike with both hands open and his teeth showing. And Officer Hargrove was faster. Hargrove stepped sideways and got one big calloused hand flat against the center of Garrett's chest. And he kept walking. And he walked Garrett backwards 6 full steps until the small of Garrett's back hit the front fender of the black Mercedes and stopped him. "Sir," Hargrove said. His voice was almost gentle. "Do not take another step. I am going to need you to put both of your hands on the hood of your vehicle, please. Flat, where I can see them." Garrett did not move. "Sir." Garrett put his hands on the hood of the Mercedes. Hargrove's radio came up to his mouth. He spoke into it in the flat code of a man who had done this many thousand times. A second unit. A supervisor. The county DA's after-hours line. Haley stood on the sidewalk and watched the small, careful machine of an arrest begin to assemble itself in front of her shop. A silver Lexus sedan turned the corner of Hollis at speed. It pulled up to the curb behind the police cruiser. The driver's door opened. Nathaniel Brennan stepped out hatless. This time his charcoal overcoat half-buttoned his briefcase, already in his hand. He took the scene in with one slow scan. He walked toward Haley. He did not appear to hurry. Lawyers like Nathaniel Brennan did not need to hurry. The world tended to wait for them. "Miss Whitmore." "Mr. Brennan, I take it the morning has been eventful." "Yes, sir." "I came as soon as the county clerk's office faxed my office a courtesy copy of the condemnation filing. I'm sorry I did not arrive sooner. Are you all right?" "I am fine." "I see." He looked at Garrett, who was now leaning forward on the hood of the Mercedes with his palms flat on the metal and his head down between his shoulders, Brennan's face did a single small thing. It was not quite a smile. It was the expression a fisherman wears when the line goes tight after a long, quiet hour. "Officer Hargrove," Brennan said. "My name is Nathaniel Brennan of Brennan and Associates in Boston. I am Miss Whitmore's counsel and the executor of the Cordelia Whitmore estate. I will be filing an emergency motion in Berkshire Superior Court within the hour to enjoin any further action on the condemnation notice currently posted on this door, and to compel the immediate forensic preservation of Mr. Pike's truck, his cellular phone, and the envelope of cash he just referenced on the public sidewalk in front of 3 witnesses. I would also like to formally request that Mr. Holloway's vehicle be impounded pending the issuance of search warrants. Would you allow me to make a phone call before you transport?" "Counselor," Hargrove said, "you make whatever phone calls you need to make." Brennan stepped to one side. He pulled out his cell phone. He spoke quietly for 2 minutes. He listened. He nodded twice. He closed the phone. He came back to Haley. "The Boston field office of the FBI," he said. "Economic Crimes Division. They were already aware of Mr. Holloway. Apparently, he has been a person of background interest in 2 open investigations for the past 3 years. I'm told a special agent named Sloan will be in Millbrook by morning. The agent would like to interview you at our convenience. I've told the agent that we will make ourselves available at 10 o'clock tomorrow." "All right," Haley said. Brennan looked at her for a long moment. "Haley, yes. You have done a great deal of difficult work today. I am going to suggest that you allow me to handle the paperwork on the sidewalk for the next 2 hours. I want you to walk back into your shop. I want you to lock the door. I want you to sit down." "Yes, sir." She walked past Garrett on the way to her door. She did not look at him. She walked past him the way you walk past a piece of furniture in a hotel lobby. She reached up. She tore the red condemned poster off her front door in one long ripping motion. She balled it up. She dropped it at Garrett's feet on the sidewalk. She unlocked her door. She went inside. She closed the door behind her. She slid the deadbolt. She walked behind the oak counter. She sat down on the wooden floor. She put her forehead against the cool wood of the counter base. She breathed. That night, Haley did not sleep. She did not sleep, but she did not sit on the green velvet couch and shake either. She made a small fire in the cast-iron stove she found at the back of the shop, using kindling and an old wooden crate she broke up with the heel of her sneaker. She ate a peanut butter sandwich Belle had pressed into her hand at the diner that morning, the second of 2. Belle had wrapped in foil and tucked into her satchel without comment. She drank a glass of water from the tap. She washed the glass. She set it upside down on a clean rag to dry. Then she went down into the vault. The leather satchel was already there on the mahogany desk where she had left it before the chaos on the sidewalk. The Garrett folder was inside it. She sat at the desk. She turned on the small green-shaded banker's lamp her grandmother had screwed to the corner of the desk for reading. She began methodically to make copies for the FBI of every document in the Hartwell report, using the small flatbed scanner and the laser printer her grandmother had thoughtfully built into the workbench against the right-hand wall. She worked for 2 hours. She was on the last folder, the one Hartwell had labeled Supporting Documents. Personal when she noticed it. The folder had been the thickest of the lot. She had assumed it contained additional bank statements. As she lifted out the last sheaf of paper to feed it through the scanner, she felt something stiffer than paper at the very back of the folder. A thin cardboard sleeve the size of a paperback novel. She had not seen it earlier. It had been wedged so tightly against the back wall of the manila folder that it had looked in the lamplight like part of the folder itself. She pulled the sleeve out. It was unmarked. No label. No date. The cardboard was old, the corners softened by handling. She slid her finger under the flap. Inside was a single envelope. The envelope was small, cream-colored. The paper was heavier than the lavender stationery Meredith favored, and lighter than the cream stationery her grandmother used for her own letters. It was a different paper, an older paper, a paper Haley had never seen before in her life. The envelope was sealed with a small disc of dark red wax. The wax had been pressed with a signet that bore a single letter, B. Haley's breath caught. She turned the envelope over. Written across the front in a hand that was not her grandmother's was a short instruction in fading black ink. For Haley, when she is old enough to understand. From her father. Haley did not move. She sat at the mahogany desk in the perfect light of her grandmother's vault, and she held the small cream envelope in her hands, and she felt the world stop turning around her. The hum of the vent in the back corner, the faint creak of the building settling overhead, the small bright pool of green-shaded lamplight on the desk. All of it held its breath with her. Her father had been 32 years old when he died. She had been 1. She had no memories of him. She had 2 photographs, one in which he was holding her on a beach somewhere on the Massachusetts coast and grinning at the camera with his eyes squinted against the sun. One in which he was leaning against the front fender of an old work truck with Whitmore Construction painted on the door, his arms crossed, looking calm and amused at someone who was not the photographer. That was the entire archive. That was every piece of him she had ever owned. And Garrett had once thrown the beach photograph into the garbage when she was 11 for leaving it on the kitchen counter, and she had spent 40 minutes after dinner picking coffee grounds off it in the bathroom. She slid her thumb under the wax seal. The wax cracked clean. She unfolded the letter. It was dated June 3rd, 2009, 2 weeks before Bennett Whitmore had collapsed on his kitchen floor. The handwriting was a man's handwriting, blocky and forward-leaning, the handwriting of someone who had taken notes on job sites for 10 years and had developed a hand that could be read in bad light. The ink was a plain blue ballpoint. My dear Haley, if you are reading this, then I did not get to give it to you in person. And that means a great many things have gone wrong in a great hurry. And you are reading this from your grandmother's hand instead of from mine. I'm sorry for that. I would have wanted to give it to you at your high school graduation. I would have wanted to give it to you the morning of your wedding. I would have wanted more than anything to never give it to you at all, and to throw it in the wood stove 20 years from now, when you and I were laughing about how dramatic your old dad used to be. But I am writing this letter because I cannot count on those mornings anymore. And a man who has a 1-year-old daughter writes the letter when he can, and he hopes that he wasted the paper. I want to tell you a few things in case I wasted nothing. I want you to know that I love you. I want you to know that on the day you were born, I sat in the corner of the hospital room for 40 minutes with you on my chest. And I did not say anything because anything I tried to say sounded too small. I want you to know that I have rocked you to sleep on every couch in our house, and that you snore even at 1-year-old. You snore like a longshoreman, and I love it. I want you to know that you came into the world looking exactly like your mother, and that you cried for the first 3 days like you knew already that the world was going to be a complicated place, and you were not wrong. I am writing this letter because I have learned in the last 60 days that my business partner has been stealing from our company for a long time. I have learned that he is a much more careful and a much more vicious man than I believed when I signed him onto the company 3.5 years ago. I have learned that there is a federal investigation into wire transfers I did not authorize and signatures I did not sign. And I have learned that the wire transfers and the signatures are too clean and too numerous for me to undo by Monday. I have hired a lawyer in Boston. I'm going to your grandmother's house in Millbrook next weekend to talk this through with her, because your grandmother is the steadiest person I have ever met in my life, and I trust her more than I trust most attorneys. I am also writing this letter because the man who has been stealing from me is a man I have brought into our house. I have brought him to dinner. I have introduced him to your mother. I have shaken his hand in our front yard with you in my arms. His name is Garrett Holloway. If something happens to me and I am unable to clear this up myself, I want there to be a piece of paper somewhere in this world that has his name on it in my own handwriting. Garrett Holloway, of Holloway Capital Partners, of an offshore corporate structure I'm attaching to this letter on a separate page with account numbers and routing details that I have copied directly from the bank confirmations our office keeps in the operations file. Garrett Holloway has stolen more than $3 million from this company. He has forged my signature 47 times. He has used the proceeds to seed a real estate development LLC that I believe is currently looking to acquire properties in Natick and in Framingham. The men he has used to set up the Cayman accounts are listed on the attached page. The bank officers who process the wire transfers are also listed, although I do not yet know which of them are knowingly complicit and which of them simply did not look closely enough. I am writing this down so that nobody can ever say I did not see it. I saw it. I am writing it down so that nobody can ever say I did not have time. I had time. I had 2 weeks. I just did not have enough of them. I have spoken to your mother about all of this. She is frightened. She is 25 years old, and we have a 1-year-old, and the federal subpoenas are coming to our home. She does not know what to do. I want to tell you, Haley, in case you ever wonder about it later, that I do not blame her for being frightened. Your mother is a good person who has been put inside a situation she should not have had to handle at 25. I want you to do one thing for me, my darling girl. If you ever read this letter, I want you to remember one sentence and to repeat it to yourself whenever you need to. I love you more than any building. I love you more than any company. I love you more than any dollar that has ever been printed in the history of this country. None of those things made you, and none of those things will ever take you from me, no matter where I am or am not. When you read this, be brave. Be careful with your money. Be kinder than you have to be and tougher than you think you can be. Trust your grandmother. She raised your mother by herself, and she has raised through your mother a piece of you. And that piece of you is the best piece, and you should always listen to it. I will see you when I see you, my brave girl. I love you, always. Your father, Bennett. Haley did not move. She sat at the mahogany desk in the perfect light of her grandmother's vault, with the small cream envelope in one hand and the single page of her father's letter flat on the green felt blotter under the other. And she did not move for a long time. She did not cry the way she had cried in the diner. She did not cry the way she had cried on the cold wooden floor behind the oak counter. She cried the way a person cries when something that has been missing for 18 years walks back into the room and sits down in its old chair, quietly, without theatrics, with the long, slow exhale of a body that has been holding itself rigid since before it could remember. Her father had known. Her father had seen it. Her father had named Garrett in his own handwriting 2 weeks before his heart had given out under the weight of what he had seen. Her father had asked her grandmother to keep this letter for her, and her grandmother, who had lived for 18 more years with that letter in her possession, had not opened it. She had not destroyed it. She had not used it. She had filed it under supporting documents, personal in a folder Hartwell himself had never been given the contents of. And she had waited. She had waited because she had known in the patient, bone-deep way that Cordelia Whitmore knew everything that the letter would matter more in Haley's hand at 18 than in any prosecutor's hand at any earlier date. She had waited because she had known that Haley would need her father's voice exactly at the moment when Haley was about to make decisions for the rest of her life. She had waited because waiting was, in the end, the discipline of love. Haley folded the letter. She put it back in the cream envelope. She put the envelope back in the cardboard sleeve. She put the sleeve back in the folder. She did not scan it. The FBI did not need it. The FBI had Hartwell. The FBI had the wire records and the forged signatures in the Cayman shell structure that her father had also identified on a separate page she now found tucked beneath the letter in the same blocky, forward-leaning hand. The page would, in fact, be the cornerstone document of the case that the United States Attorney for the District of Massachusetts would bring against Garrett Holloway 6 weeks later. Because it was contemporaneous and contemporaneous evidence from a victim who had not lived to see his own vindication, had a particular weight in a federal courtroom that no amount of investigative work after the fact could ever quite match. But the letter itself, the letter to her was not evidence. The letter was a person. Her father, on a Tuesday night in June of 2009, sitting at his kitchen table after his 1-year-old daughter had gone to sleep, writing to her in case he did not see her again. The letter was hers. The letter was not going anywhere. She turned off the green-shaded lamp. She climbed the wooden stairs. She closed the trapdoor. She pushed the heavy oak wardrobe back across the seam. She walked to the front of the shop and looked out the window. Maple Street was quiet. The cruisers and the trucks and the Mercedes were gone. A light snow had begun to fall, the first of the season. The small, dry flakes that came down in November in the Berkshires and meant winter had actually arrived. She wrapped her grandmother's quilt around her shoulders. She sat down on the green velvet couch. She closed her eyes. She slept for the first time in 2 nights without dreaming. The next 3 months happened very fast and very slow at the same time. Special Agent Sloan of the Boston field office turned out to be a soft-spoken woman in her 40s who took 2 days to copy and bag every relevant document in Haley's leather satchel, and who treated the Bennett Whitmore letter when Haley allowed her to read it once with the particular gentleness of a federal agent who had been doing this job long enough to remember that the paperwork was a person. The agent did not ask to take the original. She asked, and then accepted a high-resolution photograph for the case file. The original went back into its cardboard sleeve, and the cardboard sleeve went back into the cream envelope, and the cream envelope went back into a locked drawer of the mahogany desk in the vault. And Haley did not look at it again for nearly 2 years, because some things you do not need to look at every day to know that they are there. The investigation moved faster than Nathaniel Brennan had predicted. The wire records out of the Caymans had been preserved by a banking compliance officer in Georgetown, who had in 2009 made photocopies of every Whitmore construction wire confirmation and locked them in a personal safe on the suspicion that the day might come when somebody asked. That somebody had now asked. The compliance officer retired, and living on Grand Cayman with an arthritic spaniel was happy to cooperate. The Hartwell report and Bennett Whitmore's contemporaneous letter together walked the United States Attorney's Office through the case in a way that ordinarily took a forensic accountant 6 months to assemble. Indictments came down before Christmas. The first set of charges against Garrett Holloway listed 47 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of bank fraud, 4 counts of money laundering, and 1 count of conspiracy. The second set of charges, which arrived 6 weeks later. As the FBI pulled the thread on the rest of Holloway Capital Partners, listed an additional 16 counts related to a long-running Ponzi-style scheme through which Garrett had for the last 11 years used new investor capital to pay returns to older investors in a series of fictitious development projects across western Massachusetts and southern New Hampshire. The total verified losses to the secondary investors, mostly retirees and small family trusts, came in at $47 million. The state of Massachusetts froze Garrett's assets within a week of the first indictment. The bank foreclosed on the Brookline house within a month. Garrett's defense team, after the second set of charges, signaled its interest in a plea agreement. By April, Garrett Holloway had pled guilty to 23 of the federal counts in exchange for the dismissal of the remainder. He was sentenced in Boston by a federal judge who had been on the bench for 31 years, and who, in handing down a sentence of 28 years without the possibility of parole, observed for the record that the defendant had built his entire adult life on the death of a 32-year-old contractor who had loved his daughter. The judge then read into the record 3 sentences from Bennett Whitmore's letter to Haley. He read them slowly. He read them, the court reporter later told Brennan over coffee, in a tone of voice she had not heard from that particular judge in 20 years on the bench. Garrett did not look up. Meredith came back exactly once. It was a Thursday in late February, a clear, bright, cold afternoon. The kind of February afternoon in the Berkshires where the snow on the sidewalks turned blue in the angle of the light. Haley was inside the shop behind the counter polishing a brass mantel clock. The shop had been open to the public for 3 weeks by then on a limited Wednesday through Saturday schedule. The plywood was off the windows. The gold leaf on the front glass had been restored by a sign painter out of Pittsfield. A new bell, an actual hand-cast brass bell from a foundry in Vermont, had been hung above the door. The bell sounded different from the old one. Cleaner. Brighter. The bell rang. Haley looked up. Meredith stood in the doorway. She had aged 10 years in 4 months. Her hair, which had always been salon blonde, had come in at the roots in 2 inches of gray. She was not wearing her wedding band. She was not wearing makeup. She was wearing a wool coat that had clearly been hanging in the back of a closet for several years, and a pair of duck boots that did not fit her properly. She was carrying a small handbag and nothing else. She stood in the doorway. She did not close the door behind her. The cold came in around her ankles. Haley. Hello, Meredith. Meredith's face did the same small, breaking thing that Haley's had done in the diner 4 months ago. She put a hand against the doorframe for balance. Please. Please what? Please. Haley, I did not know. You knew. You wrote it down. You signed it with your full name. I have the letter. Meredith closed her eyes. I know you have the letter. Then you know what I know. A long silence. The bell on the door swung gently in the cold draft. I lost the house, Meredith said. I know. I have nowhere to go. I know that too. Haley, I am your mother. Haley set the brass clock down carefully on the green felt mat on the counter. She set the polishing rag beside it. She came out from behind the counter. She walked to the door. She stopped 3 feet from her mother. She looked at her for a long moment. She did not feel rage particularly. The rage had moved on to other addresses. She did not feel love either. She wished she did. She wished with a small, steady wish that she would carry with her for the rest of her life that she did. But what she felt standing 3 feet from her own mother in the open doorway of her own shop on a clear, bright, cold February afternoon was a kind of long, final quiet. The quiet of a door that had finished closing a long time ago and was only now being noticed. Meredith. Yes. Nathaniel Brennan in Boston has a list of 3 reputable bankruptcy attorneys in the Worcester area. He compiled it last month for exactly this conversation. I am going to give you his office number. I am going to write it on a piece of paper. I am going to ask you to take that piece of paper and to leave my shop. I am not going to invite you in. I am not going to invite you upstairs. I am not going to invite you back. I am not going to tell you that I forgive you, because I am 18 years old, and I do not yet know what forgiveness is, and I will not lie to you about it on the front mat of my own front door." She walked to the counter. She wrote the phone number on a small square of cream-colored notepaper with a pencil. She walked back. She held the paper out. Meredith took it. Meredith looked at her for a long moment. Meredith opened her mouth. Then she closed it. Then she nodded once, a small, precise nod, the way a woman nods when she has finally understood a sentence that has been read to her several times. She turned. She walked out of the shop. The bell rang above her. The door closed. Haley stood at the front window. She watched her mother walk down Maple Street. She watched her mother get smaller. She watched her mother turn the corner of Hollis and disappear. She went back behind the counter. She picked up the brass clock. She picked up the polishing rag. She kept working. By the autumn, Whitmore's Curiosities was a different shop. Haley had used a small portion of the place of gold from Shelf 4, brokered carefully through Walter Ashford in Boston, to fund the restoration. She had hired a legitimate masonry crew out of Springfield to repoint the brick. She had hired a roofer out of Lenox. She had hired an electrician and a plumber, and a small interior contractor, and a security firm that specialized in commercial galleries. She had restored the original pine floors. She had refinished the oak counter. She had installed museum-grade lighting in every display case. She had not sold a single thing out of the vault. The vault remained the vault. The trapdoor remained under the wardrobe. The wardrobe had been bolted to the floor on a hinge mechanism that her grandmother had thoughtfully engineered some 12 years earlier, so that Haley could swing it aside one-handed when she needed to go down, and so that no one else in the world would ever know it could move. She had reframed the upstairs shop with Walter Ashford's quiet guidance as a curated dealer, an appraisal firm specializing in 19th century Americana numismatics and horology. The clutter was gone. The dust was gone. The collection on the floor was small, beautiful, deliberately edited and arranged to be looked at rather than rummaged through. Customers from Boston and New York had begun to make the drive. She had also, on the advice of Nathaniel Brennan, finished her high school diploma through a correspondence program. The diploma now hung in a small frame on the wall of the office at the back of the shop. Beside it, in a slightly larger frame, hung the single page of her father's letter sealed behind museum glass. She had taken it out of the cardboard sleeve in May. She had had it framed in June. She had hung it in July on a Sunday morning in the kind of quiet only an empty shop has on a summer Sunday. She did not look at it every day. She did not need to. She knew where it was. On the first anniversary of the night she had been thrown into the rain, Haley closed the shop at 5 in the afternoon. She locked the front door. She turned out the museum lights. She walked back to the office. She poured herself a small glass of water from the tap. She sat in the leather chair behind the desk. The light through the front windows was the slanting gold light of late October. The maples on Maple Street were in full color, the way they always were in Millbrook in October. The way they had been the morning she had dragged 3 trash bags up this sidewalk for the first time. She looked at the wall. Her diploma. Her father's letter. A small frame photograph of her grandmother Cordelia in 1971, 26 years old, standing in front of the original Whitmore's Curiosities storefront the day she had signed the lease. She had taken the photograph out of a sleeve in one of the map cabinets in the vault. It had been in there for 55 years, waiting to be hung on a wall. Haley raised her glass of water. She did not say anything out loud. She did not need to. The girl who had stood on the sidewalk in Brookline a year ago with 3 trash bags and $34 in a checking account would not have recognized the woman in the leather chair. The woman in the leather chair would not have wanted her to. The girl had needed to do her own walking. The woman knew that. The woman remembered every step of it. The woman would carry the rain of that October night in the small of her back for as long as she lived, and she would not trade it, because the rain had taught her the only thing worth knowing, which was that the people who throw you out into the cold do not get to decide what you build with the cold afterward. Outside on Maple Street, the wind shifted. A single yellow leaf came down past the front window of Whitmore's Curiosities and settled on the sidewalk, where 1 year ago, the wheels of a black Mercedes had pulled up to the curb to make her an offer. Haley Whitmore set her glass of water down on the desk. She turned off the office light. She walked out into the gold autumn evening, and she locked the door of her shop behind her. And she went home upstairs to the small apartment she had built for herself above her grandmother's life. And the bell above the door rang once clean and bright, the way a bell rings when it has been hung properly. And the sound of it carried a long way down Maple Street in the cold, clear air.